idea to see the fact how we need to analyze the spatial relations from the non-Western countries, for example, like China, like Turkey, like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like Qatar, like South Korea, Brazil, South Africa, even Pakistan or India, for example. So these all countries, they are making their own perspectives of international relations. So if we are looking, let's say like, the exist international relations, for example, what we are trying to understand, the main philosophy of international relations from the perspective of realism, new realism, and liberalism or constructivism, those all are is Eurocentric idea that fixed up the things from the center of Europe or from the center of West. And that's the one of the main lack to understand of international relations. And that's the one of the starting point for us to understand why non-Western countries, they have their own theory, they have their own philosophy, they have their own understanding to look to the world, to look to the international politics, to look to the international community, and to make a new world order. I mean, we're not talking like whether non-Western countries like China, they're making a new world order, but the issue is here, they are making a new change. And we have to see what kind of changes are going on in here, what kind of public diplomacy is going on in here, what kind of soft power is going on in here. So that's the most important thing that we need to identify, that we need to focus here. So here, when we are talking about this kind of issue, as I said earlier, we have to find out first the power from the idea of soft, smart, and hard power. I mean, basically, the soft and smart power, or we can say the most precisely, the idea of soft power, it was first developed by Joseph Nye in 1990s, or we can say in 1994, when he developed this concept to identify why USA, they need to take a new policy to identify and to promote their interest in foreign countries, to achieve their goal in a foreign countries, because it is important for USA to make more attraction, to make a soft values, like political values, like let's say, for example, a good foreign policy, like soft foreign policy, or let's say like a good economic interaction, which will not make a much more force on other countries. So basically, it is just Joseph Nye, he just made this idea to differentiate from the hard power. Because during the Cold War time, let's say from 1945 or more interestingly or more focused way, from 1950 to 1990, these times USA more focused on hard power things. And hard powers means they basically used military power. They basically used their force, let's say force. Sometimes they use their economic force, like to make a sanction, to make a economic power on a country where they needed their interest. So it's all about the force they used by their hard power. But in 1990s or after 1990, Joseph Nye thinks like, okay, West or especially USA, they need to change their policy. They need to promote more policy which are more focused on soft issues. Let's say, let's focus more on cultural values. Let's focus more on political values. For example, democracy. For example, human rights issues. For example, women rights issues. For example, let's say like in recent times, some more liberal ideas, let's say LGBTQ, and those kind of things are promoted by the West to make their connections, to make their soft relations with other countries. So it's basically from the Western concept, or we can say Western liberal concept, to make international relations much more soft, much more, let's say, for example, we can tell it person-oriented and Western-oriented. And that later we have seen that many other countries from the West, like France, like Germany, like United Kingdom, like many non-Western countries, they took this concept and developed their foreign policy based on the soft power idea. And for that reason, we have seen that many countries, especially like US or UK or Germany or France, they give a more focus on their soft power tools, like media, for example. Let's say, for example, like if we look from USA, like CNN, or from the Germany, like Deutsche Welle, or from France, like French 24 or AFP, or from the United Kingdom, like BBC, like Reuters. These all are the one of the soft power tool that is basically working for their particular country's interest. So that's the main or absolute reasons that we need to understand the soft power. But the whole problem is here, the soft power issue basically developed from the Western countries to define the Western philosophy, to define the Western understanding, and to look the whole world from the Western based. But in recent times, what we have seen, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen a new development. We have seen a new interesting, let's say, like, the new political and economic move from the non-Western countries, even the cultural move. For example, if we want to say this specifically, economic move from the China, or in cultural move from the, let's say, like from the South Korea, or let's say even the soft military move, or even the soft cultural and political move from Turkey, soft religious move from the Saudi Arabia and Iran, and also the soft diplomatic role from Qatar. That is the absolute reasons to identify these countries' foreign policy, how these countries are making their relations with other country. What is the main basis of Turkey to make their relations? Are they really following the same policy what America is doing? Are they following the same policy what European Union countries are doing? What Iran is making their relations when they are developing their foreign policy? And even another issue is, like, say, for example, Saudi Arabia. I mean, what is their basis? Let's say, like, in recent times, they're taking many liberal tools inside the Saudi domestic politics. But apart from that, Saudi Arabia also using the religion as their soft power tool to make their relations with many Muslim countries. And also the South Korea, as I talked earlier, South Korea's now said the cultural hub. I mean, like the BTS. I'm sure all of you knows about this BTS band group, and also they have their movies industry. It's a huge, effective, impactful industry that they developed recently, and based on that cultural phenomenon, they are making their relations with other countries. So it's one of the effective countries. They showed, like, okay, how the cultural values, how the cultural relations from the perspective of their particular countries like South Korea, they're making their relations with other countries. And the most effective and most specific example from China. China is developing their own hub of soft power through their aims, through their way of interest. For example, China, they developed their Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. And after that to till now, they're making their whole relations, whole concept of foreign policy based on that Belt and Road Initiative. So this is the personal way of making relations with other countries. Even if we want to take the, let's say, for example, like China, from the perspective of economic cooperation, from the perspective of economic relations, they're making that economic relations as a soft relations. They're not telling any other countries like, okay, you have to make a business with me. You have to come and relations with me because I have a huge money. No, they're making it like an attraction. For example, let's say when Joseph Nye, he developed the soft power, he said, making attraction means like you will make your Hollywood movies like attractive tools to make your communication, to make your connection with other countries. But if we look from the Chinese case, China is making it from different side. China is basically making their economy as a soft tool, as an attraction to make a good relations, to make a effective relations with particular countries. And that's like one example. Let's say Pakistan. I mean, from 2017 to till now, Pakistan and Chinese relations, we know the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. China is trying to make a model countries to the world to show like, okay, we are making our economic investment in Pakistan and it will work as our bonding, it will work as our tool to make our soft power in a particular country. Even to some extent, for example, if we want to talk about China inside African countries, for example, we know recently, China, they are hugely investing their economy and their trade and money in many African countries like Djibouti, for example. The Djibouti, they invested and later they made a military base in there. So that's also another example to understand how China is working in different countries. Even in Sri Lanka, that's another example, like China is working and to make their own way of relations to that particular countries. So the main basis, if you want to talk, let's say like, okay, why it is important to look the non-Western international relations or non-Western foreign policy or non-Western soft power strategy, it is here. Because, for example, let's say like Turkey could be the one of the good example to understand how Turkey is making their own foreign policy. Let's say like Turkey in recent times, they are making making their own policy inside Azerbaijan, let's say in Nagorno-Karabakh. They are making their own policy in Syria, in Iraq, and also they're making their own cooperation and engagement in Central Asian countries. And also they're making their own cooperation and relations, let's say in Qatar, in Somalia, and also in Libya. So that's a good example, because Turkey is not making this kind of relations by making let's say as in generally that what we learn from the international relations, let's say like, there's a world order, and in the world order, we have to take every relations based on the world unipolar or bipolar countries decision. So who are the world unipolar and bipolar countries? Probably we can say the unipolar countries like USA and their allies. But if we look here, if we want to analyze the Turkish decision, it's much more, their decision. They are not taking those decisions by depending on any Western countries. They are going to Syria or Iraq or Central Asian countries, or let's say any countries they have a role now in Libya or Qatar. It's totally independent, and that's the way they are making their foreign policy relations. And mostly, for example, Somalia could be a good example to understand even Turkish foreign policy. For example, in Somalia, Turkey is making their real way of power bonding. Let's say they go there and they are making their relations based on a humanitarian diplomacy. So firstly, they started to reconstruct the country, to invest in a country, to work for the people, and to make a cultural bonding with the people. And then they, let's say recently, if you see a video, it's a very good documentary. It's available even though over the internet, and some clips from the theater world, maybe you can see it. It shows like main Somalian military, they are trained by the Turkish military, and those military, they are speaking in Turkish language, and they are taking commands from the Turkish military. And that's a really fantastic thing to understand new kinds of multipolar world. So that's one of the another important things to see different kind of multipolar countries who are making their own regional order, who are making their own regional policy apart from the Western policy. For example, in recent times, we can say, maybe we can agree to disagree. Let's talk about India, for example. India, they are taking their own decision in the case of Russian and Ukraine issue. And they're in one way, they want to establish their own relations with West. But on the other hand, they're taking their own particular interest from the, let's say, from the Russia, and they are not saying anything against the Russian aggression, what is going on Ukraine, and they're totally silent about that issue. Why they're making such kind of thing? Because they're believing in a multipolar world order rather than the unipolar or the previous exist world order system. And that's here we have to understand the non-Western international relations. We have to understand that the non-Western soft power. And one thing, for example, we need to again identify the main difference between the Western and non-Western IR. In a Western IR, it's more materialistic. So what does it mean materialistic, or what does it mean, like say, most of the time Western IR, or we can say the exist international relations, is mostly focused the main ontology and epistemology of the knowledge based from the Western countries concept. So for example, let's say like when we start to understand the main philosophy of international relations theory, like realism, we are taking the ideas from the Machiavelli, we are taking the ideas from the Hobbes, we are taking the ideas, let's say from when we are talking of the liberalism, we are taking the ideas from the John Locke, we are taking the ideas from the Immanuel Kant. But what's the main problem? All of these scholars, they talked their ideas based on their particular countries. So we have seen this, all of the ideas, it was developed during the Enlightenment age in Europe. And all of these ideas, they particularly targeted their own country. And that's why when we are taking, let's say that when we are taking the liberal ideas or liberalism in, or in the case of Pakistan, or in the case of, let's say, India, or in the case of South Korea, then it makes a problem. Because the Western liberal idea, maybe it is not a perfect for Chinese liberalism. The Western way of liberal realist idea, maybe it is not perfect from the perspective of the Turkish realist ideas, because Turkey is looking their realist ideas from the perspective of their foreign policy interest. Iran, for example, they're looking their own interests from the perspective of their nation's interest, rather than the idea that have been developed in the Western countries. So that's the main, I mean, philosophical difference. That's the main, interest-oriented difference, because we cannot see that everything what we are learning in our literature of international relations, it is totally, debated and confronted and argumentative from various perspectives. And one of the most idea that I'm trying to develop, and I try to understand that there is a really huge gap in international relations to understand the non-Western countries from the new concept. For example, let's say we are talking about the soft power, and we're taking those examples from the Western countries by taking, let's say, Hollywood movies, by taking the democracy, by taking the human rights from the Western perspective, by taking, let's say, different kind of liberal ideas. Those all are the things actually fine. There is no question about that, okay, whether it is a bad or whether it is a problems. No, it's most of the time it is good. Let's say that democracy for many countries is a good, absolutely a good tool for many countries' political system. Human rights, of course, there is no question about human rights. But the problem is here when it is coming from the Western countries' interest, when it is coming from the Western countries' perspective, that makes the real difference between the West and non-Western countries. For example, if we look at the Chinese foreign policy, China, when they are making their relations with Iran, let's say, I mean, in my book, I have one more book. It's about talking the China and Iran's engagement, how China is making their strategic relations with Iran. We have to see this interesting idea. China, basically, they are developing their relations based on their history and their civilization. That's the way they are making their cooperation with them. And now that's the main gap between the West and non-Western countries. For example, when I'm talking the power of bonding, that's the main issue. Let's say the why power of bonding, why we need to understand this concept. This concept totally lies in these two terms, the history and the civilization. Why? Because the West, let's say, USA, they want to make a good relations with Afghanistan or Pakistan, they need to make their all relations based on their contemporary tools, because they don't have any history. They don't have any positive, or let's say like a very good historical phenomena. That's the way they can develop their relations with Afghanistan. The same thing goes for Pakistan, because they have only the exist tool. They have only the tool. I'm saying,
Just a minute.
Professor
Madam, just a
Amir.
minute, please. Has I reached me?
I'm thinking it's better to actually connect with my presentation. Normally, I just want to talk, but I think it's much better to connect with the presentation. However, we are talking about like why power bonding and non-Western international relations and non-Western soft power strategy is important in international relations discourse, in political science, in social science, because these all of the departments somehow we have a specific knowledge, we have a specific idea that are coming from the Western or Eurocentric knowledge. And that's the main gap from the non-Western countries. Because even it is the problem from the Western countries, because they have knowledge, everything based on their perspective. And on the other hand, let's say someone from the United States or from Germany, I mean, probably a student from the university or a student from the high school, they may know about their history, about their civilization, or about their foreign policy, or let's say about their politics, but they don't have any idea about Pakistan. They are looking Pakistan from the perspective of Orientalist perspective. But a student from Pakistan, they knows very well about the Pakistan, about the region, and also from the West, also from the Western development, also from the development in the USA, the political development in Germany, the political development in, let's say, in France. So it's a good thing actually in one way from the non-Western countries, like, you know, any countries like Pakistan or India or let's say China. But it's a bad thing actually for the Western countries, because they are looking everything from their perspective, because they are thinking that all of the world is moving or all the universe are moving from the West. They're looking the all political perspective, all economic perspective, all let's say cultural perspective. It is moving from the West, and that's the main mistakes from the Western countries. And that's what they need to read again. They need to reanalyze again from the non-Western perspective. And that's why we have to see like why we need to relook the non-Western countries international relations, non-Western countries soft power strategy. Here, if you see, I mean, like I just put like so that the development, like when I'm talking in my book, because here we have a very limited time, so I cannot go in every step by step. Rather, I will say I'll talk main point, main focus point. Let's say, for example, I try to discuss first about the power. So how we need to define the power, how power has been defined from many school of thought. So a school of thought, we can say like, you know, from the realist and really new realist school of thought, how they define the power, where's the power is coming, what's the source of power to make the relations with other countries. Then I talk about the new liberal and liberal institutes or liberal school of thought, how they define the power from their perspective. And then I talk about the constructivism and then Marxism. I talk about the notion of let's say like, you know, Karl Marx's idea about power, then Gramsci's idea of power, and also the powers idea from the different prominent scholars like Max Weber, and also the idea, for example, Immanuel Wallerstein, and also the idea, let's say, how they define the power. But one thing I found the lag, let's say like the power need to define from the multipolar world's perspective, as we talked earlier, as we explained earlier. Let's say like when we're talking the power, we mostly take the power concept from the idea of, let's say, Alexander Wendt, or maybe we are taking the idea of the power from the John Mearsheimer in the contemporary times. We're taking the power idea from the idea of, let's say, from the new realist concept, from the idea that like the books written by the book The Politics Among Nations, the one of the greatest book in the new or realist scholar, especially in the classical realism, the Morgenthau. So you're taking the power idea from his concept, and mostly even the main architecture, let's say the main roots of international relations from the Western perspective, we are taking the idea of the power even from the Peloponnesian War that has been defined by Thucydides. So these are all of these scholars, somehow they talk the power from the perspective of Western countries. Let's say like they talk first Greek and Greek civilization, then later they talk somehow something from the Roman Empire, and talk something, you know, about the Enlightenment age, and then they suddenly talk about the Western Empire, let's say in a recent empire of US. So there's a huge gap in here. If we read the book of the very prominent book, I mean, I'm sure like all of you know this book that written by Henry Kissinger, The World Order. So in that book, he just basically discussed everything from the Western perspective. And that's the main problem of the Western international relations, because he talked, let's say, the non-Western countries, for example, Asian order or Islamic order, let's say the Muslim countries order, it looks like a disorder in the order system. So they started international relations from the Greek civilization, and then they talked about the European Enlightenment age, and then they suddenly talked about the American empire now. And that's the way they see the international relations. But it's a huge gap, because by looking this kind of way, we cannot understand what is going on in non-Western countries. We cannot understand what is going on in, let's say, in South Africa, in Brazil, in Pakistan, in Korea, in China or Indonesia or Malaysia, because all of these countries, they are making their new hub of international cooperation. They are making their new power from their own perspective. So that's why we need to really reanalyze this. We need to re-challenge the exist international relations theories. We need to re-talk about the exist philosophy in international relations. And that's the way I firstly talked about the power in international relations theories. And then I talked about the Joseph Snide's theory, the soft power, because it's a wonderful theory. It talked about the very fantastic idea why soft power, the attraction is much more important than the military power. And he fantastically said, like, we must develop much more attractive tools, much more attractive idea to make a more cooperation with other countries rather than military force. That's absolutely fine and absolutely good idea. But the example, they said the ontological things or the epistemological things he connected, that is basically from the Western perspective. Let's say he talked like soft power means like Hollywood movies. We should produce more Hollywood movies, because in that way we can make the more cultural attraction with the non-Western or with any other countries. But let's think, from many Muslim countries, maybe many Hollywood movies is not a good tools to make a good connection with USA, because maybe it's a liberal tools, it's a good for American foreign policy interests. Maybe it's not a good tool for the Pakistan's foreign policy interests. Maybe it's not a good tool for Turkish foreign policy interests. So that's the main lack in exists Joseph Snide's soft power theory. And that's why we need to rethink, let's say, how these countries, let's say, for example, China, they are not looking, let's say, to make their cooperation with US or also even any countries based on the Hollywood movies. They're making their own cultural industry. They're making their own cultural phenomena of their relations. For example, in recent times, recently, China is mostly focused on their movies, for example. I mean, they're giving investment to make their movies, which is mostly focused on their history. They're making many movies. These are talks about the Chinese civilization, because we know that China, they have a 5,000 year civilization. And they're basically talk their Ming dynasty, Qing dynasty, and then also they talked from Han dynasty to the Chinese Republic. And in that way, they are making their own source of their cooperation with other countries. So that's why we need to see, like, so like these countries, they are not basically following the American way of soft power. As we talk the Turkey, for example, I'm sure in Pakistan, the Turkish many serials, TV serials, and Turkish movies are so popular. Let's say Ertugrul, we can talk. We can talk about now this is it's also another one, the Magnificent Century, the Sultan Sulaiman. And also the another one, now it's recently ongoing, it's Osman. So this, all of this series, if we look, is actually the Turkish way of their cooperation. And Turkey utilized their history to make their cooperation with other countries. Turkey basically utilized their civilization. Let's say the civilization, maybe it comes from the Great Seljuk, or maybe it comes from the Ottoman Empire. So they're basically utilized this kind of civilizational history to make their cooperation with their strategic areas, let's say like Balkan countries, Asian countries, Muslim countries, and also let's say many non-Muslim countries based on their historical cooperation. And that's the way they're making their soft power. And it's not basically the same way the soft power developed by the America. It's not the soft power that has been developed by the United Kingdom. So that's what we need to understand. We need to identify this every country's aspect of their cooperation, engagement, and attributions, and also their attractions. And that's the way we need to see this. All of the countries, they have their independent international relations policy. They have their own foreign policy interest, and they have their own foreign policy goals. And that's the way finally I talk, let's say, like the power of bonding is an important tool. It's a very, very, they say, contemporary tool that we can understand the non-Western countries. Because all of the non-Western countries, including China, Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, India, or we can say like the Saudi Arabia, these all countries, they somehow utilize the history and civilization. In a Western international relations, they are not talking too much on a history. For example, let's think about the France. France, they don't love to talk about history because it's a colonial history. They don't want to say like we have a very civilized history because they don't have a civilized history. They occupied many African, especially North African countries. We can say like African countries and West African countries. We can start from the Algeria to Tunisia, Morocco. I mean, all of these countries is a very bloody and very dark history of the France. The same way from the United Kingdom, the Britain. We know, I mean, we are especially the people from the South Asia, they knows very well the British history. It's a dark history and it's a colonial history. So they cannot utilize their history based on their civilization. So they are not talking, that's why the history. And also we can say that the USA, because it's a very new country. USA, they have just 200 years history. So they don't have any history even the 200 years before because it was not a country. It's a new country and they are making their own policy now. But in the case of many other countries, for example, we can talk the Turkey, we can talk China, we can talk India. All of these countries, they have a huge historical tools. We may have some debates about India, for example, maybe they're interpreting their specific history. Maybe they are trying to interpret their history, especially from the government policy, maybe specific history, but still they have a civilization and history. On the other hand, we can say that Turkey, they are utilizing their own historical tools. Let's say, for example, their tools of the factual things of Ottoman history and Great Seljuk. And also from the China, they have also using their own civilization and history. So this is the important thing to understand this all countries' history, even the Iran, for example. Iran is utilizing their history from their Persian civilization. We can talk about the Safavid Empire, we can talk the Al-Khamid, and all of these historical and civilizational things told us these all countries, they have their own way of roots of international relations. They have their own way of development of foreign policy. And that's why I said, like, okay, these all countries, they have some interrelated, basically utilizing their historical and civilizational tools, because their history and civilization is much more positive in compare with Western countries. Why I'm telling such thing? For example, we can say like the Chinese civilization is a 5,000-year civilization. On the other hand, the Iran, they have also long civilizational history. But you know, one thing is very interesting. China and Iran, they never fight with each other. We are talking about a big fight, like war. They don't have any war. Two empire, they lived with each other, but never fight with each other. That's the most important thing. But if you look, if you want to talk the European history, especially before the Enlightenment age, we can talk the England and France. They fought with each other more than 100 years. We talk about the Germany and France. We talk about the many other countries in Europe. Let's say if we go back to 400 years before, you'll find a war, blood, and dark ages in here. But in the Asian side, especially in the Asian countries, it's very rare case you will find this kind of bloody history, because they don't have that long fight with each other. I mean, even you will not fight like so they were killing with each other because of their civilians or women. That's a very rare case you will find here. So because they developed their own civilization from the, I mean, we can say the spiritual idea of their history and civilization. So that's the way we need to understand these countries. Here, I just want to show you, like I said, the two specific example that I used in my book, the China and India, for example. Probably I will tell it very shortly. I mean, when I'm talking about the Chinese soft power or Chinese way of their power of bonding, I basically try to take the Chinese exist public diplomacy and public, or we can say the soft power. So when we're talking the Chinese soft power, we need to go the exist tools and instruments of Chinese soft power. For example, we can say the China and their educational resources. So what are their resources? You know, in recent time, China, they have very good universities, and they're trying to develop their university from their own perspectives. And those universities are serving the interest of China. They have many ranking universities now, and they're trying to attract the many foreign students. And I know very well in my thesis also, or also in my scholarship, I mean, my book, I use this thing. The most of the scholarship they're providing, one of the countries are of the recipient is Pakistan, because many Pakistani students now moving to China for their higher studies. And in that way, China is making their own attraction. We can say like own soft power. And also we can say like Confucius Institute. The Confucius Institute, of course, they have many tools. They're providing scholarship. They are teaching to other countries' students, let's say Chinese language. And in that way, they are making their attraction to other countries. For example, as per I saw, like one of the countries in the whole world, the Confucius Institute, they have their branches. It's the Pakistan, because the Confucius Institute is actively working in Pakistan to ensure the Chinese soft power. And the Chinese film industry is more interesting, because in recent times, if we look to the foreign people who are watching Chinese movies, it's always increasing. So if we compare the 10 years before and 10 years later of Chinese movies, watcher, so we can understand the people who are watching Chinese movies, it's always increasing. Even in compare with the Hollywood industry, we can say like, okay, it's not that much far, but still it's increasing, and the level of acceptance of Chinese movies, it's a good tool for China to make their cooperation with other countries by making their cultural cooperation. And apart from that, we know about the Belt and Road Initiative. I already talked about that, because China is making this whole giant policy like Belt and Road Initiative as a tool of their cooperation with many non-Western and Western countries. China is making investment in Greece. They are making their cooperation through the Belt and Road Initiative in Italy, in Germany, basically. Even also they are making a good investment in Turkey, for example. and also they have a very good policy in Myanmar. That's also interesting point. I mean, we have to understand this. So we know about the Rakhine State's problem and also Rohingya problem. But one of the behind reasons of this Rohingya problem is actually Chinese investment. And China is trying to ensure their interest in there by making their investment. And let's move to let's say that during the COVID-19, it was one of the fantastic tools that China used to ensure their soft power. And apart from that, we need to understand the different kind of political communication of China. China, basically, they're using their communist idea, let's say by making a song, by making a revolutionary idea, by making an even different kind of dress up in different or many countries, to make a soft tune of communist idea. And that's one of the fantastic, we can say that from Chinese soft power. Maybe from the Western idea, this kind of soft power is a propaganda. It's a Chinese propaganda. China, they want to put and protect their interest. But on the other way, we need to understand it. China is making their own way of soft power cooperation. And also international media. We know about the Chinese media like CGTN, CCTV, Xinhua, People's Today. All of this media, they are making their own steps in international community to make their independent foreign policy and cooperation. And apart from all of this thing, China is also now making a Chinese aid program. Chinese aid program is one of the programs. China is basically giving a humanitarian aid and cooperation with different non-Western and Western countries. And apart from that, there is another tool of China that's called the Chinese unofficial channel. So unofficial channel is basically, we can say that sometimes it's track to diplomacy, or maybe sometimes they're utilizing their way of cooperation from non-state actors. For example, China, they are making a huge investment in many Western universities, including Harvard University, including, we can say that many American university, they are making this investment, and they are making a good cooperation with the scholars from those particular countries. And it is actually an unofficial channel of Chinese cooperation with them, because in that way, they are making a good hegemony on different countries' university. So that's also another tool we can say that it's a Chinese soft power China is making. So here, when I'm talking the example, let's say like, okay, we understand that China, they have these tools, how we can utilize, how we can need to look this kind of cooperation in specifically two countries. One is Pakistan and other is Iran. So I took these all ideas based on these four concepts, let's say historical and civilizational roots. So how China is utilizing their history and civilization to make a good cooperation, let's say with Pakistan and also with Iran, and also political and diplomatic engagement. So let's say leadership visit and the leaders to leaders cooperation between Pakistan and Iran, between Pakistan and China, and also between Pakistan and Iran and China. So that's also another tool to understand the Chinese soft power. And the other tools like cultural cooperation. And in my book also, I try to see this thing, like, okay, how cultural cooperation is happening between China, Pakistan, and China, Iran. That's also another thing. And the economic partnership. That's a very generate things we know, that trade cooperation, energy cooperation between China, Pakistan, and China, Iran. So that's the way we need to understand the Chinese soft power. And as I say, the Chinese soft power is basically Chinese way of power bonding, because China utilized this history, civilization, politics, diplomacy, culture, and economy as a tool of their power of bonding. And that's the way to develop this cooperation. And when I use this thing, I just want to show you like how I use the data analysis, because these are the way I develop the coding. Because in my book, basically, I use the coding work. It's called the computing social science. I mean, that's basically you have to develop your own codes, and you have to have your own code book. Based on your code book, let's say history, politics, diplomacy, culture, and economy. And under the subcode, you need to see the cooperation between these two countries. So when I'm talking the China and Pakistan, I have to see the China and Pakistan from the different dynasty of China. Let's say Han Dynasty, Three Kingdoms, modern China. And also let's say like the same way I have to see the Chinese political leaders visit, Chinese embassy engagement. China and Pakistan, do they have any kind of important agreements? What kind of agreements they have? I have to see that the Chinese cultural cooperation like Confucius Institute in Pakistan. I have to see the China and let's say the Chinese different kind of scholarship that is specifically target the Pakistani students. So that's the way I see the book, like how China is making their cultural attraction inside Pakistan. And also economic partnership, as I said earlier, the Chinese investment inside Pakistan. We know very well that under the China and Pakistan economic corridor, China is making a huge investment, especially in a Gwadar port and near to the Gwadar port. And also China have a very different kind of investment inside Pakistan to make a long street, bridge, hospitals, schools. And that's the way China want to make their footsteps inside the Pakistan. So as we talk the power of bonding, and that's the way China is making their own power of bonding. That's the way China is making their own soft power. And that's the way it is a different from the, let's say, American style of soft power. Because in a recent times for USM, I mean, it's not about the US, it's the problem for all exist power. Because for them, security or ensuring security is much more important rather than to make a more economic partnership. So for example, let's say USA or United Kingdom or France, let's say, for these countries, to make security relations or security cooperation is much more important rather than economic investment. And China is taking that advantages. China is trying to invest in different countries like Pakistan, like Djibouti, like many African countries, like many Latin American countries. And by making that investment, they are making their own footsteps. And that's the different things from the Western countries. So here is the things we need to understand that China, and also I utilize the other example from the India's case. I try to see the India's things from their own perspective, like how India is trying to utilize their history. I mean, probably India's or current government, maybe they're not happy with the Mughal empire, let's say Babur empire, but still they're utilizing different kind of strategy that they found from their civilization or from their history, from the Maurya civilization or Maurya empire or dynasty, from the Gupta dynasty, and from the different dynasty that is really important for India to make their foreign policy, to make their new connections with different countries, let's say Nepal, to make a connections with Myanmar, to make a connections with Sri Lanka. And that's the way they're utilizing that kind of things from their history. And also in the recent times, we have seen the India's Bollywood. I mean, India's Bollywood is working as a new vehicle of their soft power tools in many corners of the world, because it's one of the, we can say, like effective tool that India is comparatively doing if we want to compare with China, because China, they don't have that much industry like Bollywood. For example, we can see these things with the Hollywood system, because in a Hollywood, America, the way they are making their soft power, somehow India is trying to utilize the same strategy by utilizing their Bollywood industry. So they're utilizing this cultural phenomena to reach to the specific country and making their own policy in there. And also now in recent times, India, they are trying to give some lucrative scholarship for a specific country. For example, they are giving a scholarship to the Bangladeshi students, to the Sri Lankan students, to the Nepali students and Bhutanese students. And in that way, they are making their attraction to those countries. Even they are investing a huge, let's say, investment in African countries. For example, in a recent time, they invested more than $500 million in different African countries, and they made one group. It's almost like a group, like a BRICS. It's called the IPSA. So through the IPSA, they are making a different kind of program with the many leaders of Africa. And that's the way they are making their own soft power strategy in Africa. And apart from that, they are making their leadership visits in many countries and ensure their governance and their interest to go to the different countries. So that's the way we need to understand how even India, they are working in different countries to ensure their soft power. Here, I just want to talk something about the coding, but I think it will be too heavy to talk now. I mean, maybe if we have a more question about that, then we can talk about the things. I just want to show you like how I put the coding analysis in the book. I try to make a difference between the China and India and try to establish this idea, like the power bonding, why it is important and why it is different from Western concept, why the Chinese perspective of international relations is totally different from the American perspective of international relations, why India's perspective of interest or why India's perspective of their power and American perspective of world power is totally different. They can come together, but it is a multipolar world. And in a multipolar world order, every regional countries, whatever it is, China or Turkey or Iran or Saudi Arabia, they're making their own policy and their own power of bonding. So that's the main point that we can come up with a conclusion, and we can see this, that why the non-Western countries, they are, or their international relations and their foreign policy is different from the Western international relations concept. Their philosophy is different. Let's say like China, they're mostly focused on the Confucius philosophy. They're mostly focused on their revolutionary philosophy. They believe in a different kind of philosophy, which is totally absent in a Western philosophy. So that's why, I mean, we need to understand this thing. Many Muslim countries, they have a different philosophy in compared with the American philosophy. So that's why we need to see like the power of bonding is important to identify, to analyze the countries which are located in non-West, not in Europe, not in North America, not in Oceania. These countries, they are from Africa, they are from Asia, they are from Latin America, and they are making their own way of international relations. So I think I can stop here for now. Maybe we can take some question. Professor, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now it's time for the question answer. So I will start from the students. If any have the question, please raise your hand, then introduce yourself and then ask the question, please. So anybody else from the faculty members, please introduce yourself first.
Dr. Mohammad Ramzan, PhD in non-traditional security. and I am serving in the Department of International Relations as assistant professor. Sir, very good talk ever I have heard, but the first part of the talk was very well. You talk about China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, CPEC. You talk about soft power status. You talked about Turkey's own foreign policy. You talked about cultural bonding of the people, Ukraine war, and some points I have written about China's soft power strategy. As far as your presentation is concerned, China's soft power strategy related to education, film, CPEC, COVID-19, and last is a soft tune of political communication. So as far as the last point is concerned, soft tune of political communication, if we see the recent history of Iran, the history of Iran and Saudi Arabia, they were not on the same page, but recently it was the core efforts of China to bring them on the same page. So being an expert of international relations, sir, how do you see this development? Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, I think it's a wonderful question, and thanks again. You took a great notes of my presentation. I love to hear these notes. And by the way, I mean, yes, you are talking about the China and Iran. I mean, the strategic cooperation. That's an interesting point actually for China, because like when you are talking about the Western, non-Western international relations, one thing we need to identify, China is making a new way of international relations. It's true, but the problem is here, China is making something that is not clear to us, because it's making their way of relations that we can call, let's say, I mean, not a rule-based international order. So what do we mean the rule-based international order? For example, I mean, we can criticize USA. We can say like the USA, they did something wrong in Afghanistan. Maybe they did something wrong in Iraq. We can say why? Because USA, they developed, I mean, before making their empire, before making their unipolar system, they said, okay, this is the international law. And based on this international law, we'll make our cooperation, we'll make our relations, we will make our, I mean, rule in world order. But in the case of China, we don't know what kind of world order they're making. We don't know what kind of rules they're talking to us. Yes, they are making attraction. They have a soft power. They have their culture. They have their history. They have their civilization. But the main gap is here. They are not talking the what is the rule. So this is the way we have to see the China and Iran relations. China and Iran, they are making that strategic cooperation. But the gap is here because nobody knows what is going on inside the secret cooperation between China and Iran. I mean, people know that China and Iran, they made a 25 years strategic cooperation between them. And nobody's talking about the military cooperation between these two countries because, I mean, they're not open to the world, what kind of secret cooperation they're making. However, we have to come up this point. I mean, for my book, I met with many diplomats from Iran and also from China. One thing I found, especially from the Iranian perspective, Iran, they need a partner because they are somehow isolated in the world politics. They need some very good countries who can help them. Let's say for one diplomat, he told me, we need a more cooperation from the China or Russia because we don't have any chance to have a cooperation from the European countries or from the, let's say, USA. So we need this cooperation because in that way we can show to the world we have one more powerful countries who are helping us and who are with us with our strategic cooperation and with our strategic target. So what is their strategic target? Basically, China, they are starting their strategic target to make their, the long development assistance tool inside Iran. China, they are now investing in a Chabahar port, which is near to the Gwadar port. Even in future, I mean, I'm sure like some of you are following the Chinese CPEC and their interest in Gwadar port. So if China, they can also make their good policy in Chabahar port, then think the whole Indo-Pacific region, the Indo-Pacific Ocean, it will be totally controlled under China. So the Chabahar port from Iran and Gwadar port from Pakistan, that makes a real policy from the Chinese perspective. Apart from that, we have to come up this one more point. The India, before the China, before 2016, India, they invested more than $500 million for Chabahar port. But it was, the install based of money. And somehow Iran, they just changed their policy and they make their cooperation with China because they give more priority to China rather than India, because they thought China would be more effective and more powerful partner to ensure their interest inside their country. And that's what they change it, and they make their policy with the with the China. And as I said, the Chabahar port is one of the strategic target from the Chinese perspective. Even apart from that, we have to come up with one more point. I'm sure all of you know about the American Indo-Pacific strategy. So USA, they have a specific goal in an Indo-Pacific region, especially in the Indian Ocean region. So in the Indian Ocean, America, they have their own strategy and they have their partner like India, Australia, Japan. And through this partner, they are making their new tools of cooperation, let's say Quad, for example. Through the Quad, they are ensuring their security cooperation. So when we're looking the China and Iran cooperation, especially strategic cooperation, I just said like they are trying to make their investment in Chabahar port, and they are making the new cooperation with Pakistan. And next time they have a really huge investment in Horn of Africa, let's say in Ethiopia, in Somalia, especially in Somaliland, in Djibouti. In that way, you see here in one side in the map, especially if you look to the global map, in one side, they have a control in Horn of Africa, especially the area of Bab el-Mandeb from Asia to Africa. And they will have a control the Iran, especially the Hormuz Strait. And then they will have a control the Indo-Pacific region. Then it will make much more, easygoing process for the China to ensure their foreign policy interest in the region. And that's the way they're making their foreign policy. That's the way they're making their interest in the region, by making their strategic cooperation with Iran. And that's the reasons that Iran is really, really important country for China. And from the Iranian perspective, China is also a very important country because they need a partner, like they need a powerful partner. They need a partner who can help them, especially in a United Nations, especially in a regional problem. And if they have any threat from the USA, in that way, they can get any help from the China. So that's the way we can read the China and Iran's strategic cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor, we have another person, another professor who wants to ask you something.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
Yes,
you,
please.
Honorable Dean. I'm Sarfraz Korejo from Institute of International Relations. I must extend my heartiest congratulations to the organizers, the team from Shah Abdul Latif University, Khairpur, and also you are the part and parcel of this very enlightening academic interaction. So I would like to know from you very precisely on the basis of your very excellent authored book, The Power of Bondage. And as you know that it is all the reflection of the pioneer of soft power, Professor Joseph Nye. And as a puzzle, I would like to know you that here at Shah Abdul Latif University, Khairpur, we have the two grand passive student of Professor Joseph Nye. So I will tell you who are they, but right now it is puzzle to be unknotted. So very specifically and precisely, I want to know you that the role of academician is very vital and very important in making the bondage. So being the part of past RCD and ECO, we the member countries, the pioneering member countries, Iran, our brotherly nation and state, Turkey and Pakistan. So what type of the academic collaboration we can go for and we can achieve? So just tell me in this. And another, for the best usage of all the faculty member, participant and the student, our dynamic student, I would like to request Dr. Laket Chandio, who can officially request you to send the PowerPoint presentation. It is beautiful, enlightening, as Dr. Ramzan said, that only the first part of your presentation was excellent, but I will stamp that all the parts of your presentation were really enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much for your great comments. Indeed, if you want to see, let's say countries like Turkey, or countries like China, especially we are talking about the ECC or also RCC, especially the economic cooperation. If I'm not wrong, you are basically talking about the, how we can strengthen our economic things under the bondings or under the more bondings with different countries. Here is a thing, I think maybe I will not take much, long term, because I think everybody here, we understand the basic international relations concept. But I just want to stock these things from a very common IR theory. It's called, power up transition or power transition theory. So in a power transition theory, we know one thing very well. When we are talking the regional order, or we are talking about the world order, let's say like unipolar countries or exist power countries, they always have a struggling with the rising power countries. So if you are talking the rising power, we are talking about China, we are talking about Turkey, we are talking about many other countries who are trying to be emerging, or we can say like trying to be a middle power countries. So these middle power and emerging and rising power countries, they're trying to, put their full, let's say, put steps, but we cannot say it's some really, really effective step they are making, because they have some limitations. And that limitation is belong to the exist power. Because exist power, like USA, they are still ongoing and making their own policy. That's what they built up, let's say, or after the Second World War, or after the, more precisely, after the Cold War. And that's why even to China, if they want to make their own economic hub, they're basically utilizing the exist globalization system that has been introduced by the West. But they are not telling like, okay, what would be their own system. And that's why we cannot see that the really, really so effective idea of their bonding. They are just still in a starting point. As a rising power, they're trying to make their strengthening relations. Even for Turkey, they're trying to make a cooperation with Somalia or Qatar, or let's say in Libya, or to some extent in Iraq. Let's say, especially in a Turkish case, Turkey is now making a Turkey-Iraq development project. And under this development project, it's mostly, we can understand this development project like CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So under this project, they're making their investment in Iraq, and they want more partners. In tomorrow, they have a plan. Maybe they want to increase the partners. It could be the Pakistan, it could be UAE, it could be Saudi Arabia. So that's the way they're trying to put their step. At China, they put their step like Belt and Road Initiative, CPEC, or other many initiatives. Let's say BRICS, for example. Especially from the Russian and Chinese perspective, they're making their own steps. But the issue is here, if we want to say the overall perspective, it is still in a very initial step. We cannot say like, okay, that it can be comparable with the Western exist power, because Western international relation or Western power, especially in terms of economy, is the one of the source of their all power. Because, if we want to look after the Second World War, we can talk the Marshall Plan. Under the USA, they put a huge investment inside the Europe, like Italy, like Turkey, like Belgium, Austria. They invested more than $12 billion. And that's the way they built their hub in all worlds, or all the countries. That's the way they build their world power or world order. So now the China and Turkey or any other countries, they need to invest in that way. If they can invest in that way, then they can strengthen their cooperation. But we have a hope they started to do it. But yes, there is a competition. There is a, competitive world, and they need to face the exist power. And we cannot say they will be really, really immediate successful, but they knows their way. They are already their way, and they're trying to do it. As I said about China and Iran and also many other countries. But it needs a time. We cannot say like it would be immediately successful, but they will be more successful in future. Thank you, Spurs.
So thank you very much, Dr. Nazmul Islam. Finally, I would like to say thank you very much. Really, it was an extensive lecture by you. And I must say thank you very much on the behalf of the Institute of International Relations and the Faculty of Social Sciences. And with this hope that these type of the collaborations will continue in the future as well. And it was a well presentation, well presented. You let me remind you here that Professor Islam was the colleague with me at the Karabakh University and his own university at the Ankara Yildiz University. And this university where he's working, it is amongst the top 10 universities of the Ankara or Turkey. So finally, I'm very thankful to you for your cooperation. And on the behalf of the university, on behalf of our department, our institute, and on behalf of this university, I'm thankful to you. And in the end, I must say the tashakkur laziram. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
And
Thank you.
Teşekkür ederim. It's a really
So
great.
I'll send you all the pictures which we have collected